Hello and welcome to Biz1st Review 360, where we bring you a roundup of this week's top business stories and developments that impact the economy. I'm Joel Outschoon. Well, earlier this week at the Sri Lanka Investment and Business Conclave 2017, hosted by the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, Minister of Finance and Mass Media, Mangala Samaraweera, announced the setting up of a public-private partnership unit aimed at better securing investment. To find out about its mandate, role and task, we invited new PPP Unit's Chief Operating Officer for a chat.
We're joined by a very familiar figure to the business community here in Sri Lanka, Mr. Bradley Emerson. He is the new Chief Operating Officer for the newly formed Public-Private Partnership Unit. Mr. Emerson, thank you very much for being on the program.
Absolutely. Pleasure.
Let me start by asking you, the Public-Private Partnership Unit, you mentioned just outside that it was cabinet approval for this was granted in January and that it's being set up and it was announced this week. What exactly will be the work of this newly formed unit?
Right. I'll give you the rationale for the decision. If you look at our balance sheet, our gearing is about 68 to 70%. So you don't have any further room for borrowing, right? When your balance sheet, your borrowing is 60% to GDP, there is no room for borrowing. And that constrains your utility of your revenue. As of now, over 90% of the revenue goes into servicing loans. But you need to have infrastructure development if you are to sustain your economic agenda. So no economic agenda can run without the flow of investment. So that's basically the outline. So the reason why this came in is because of our limitation to borrow, but the necessity to continue with infrastructure development. So private-public partnership model is something that actually had been instigated or suggested by the World Bank as a vehicle that could actually help you continue your agenda without having a burden on your balance sheet. So that's the reason why this has been brought in, and this is something that has been worked for decades in other parts of the world. Not that private-public partnership is new to Sri Lanka. We have done private-public partnerships. The two ports we have done, Telecom, Prima, Indian Oil, these are all private-public partnerships. But those were done as one-off. Now here it is done more as a compulsion to make sure that we shift this expenditure off balance sheet.
Do you feel that, given what you mentioned, that these are fairly desperate circumstances when your borrowing is at 60% of GDP and 90% of your revenue is going to servicing loans, do you feel that you'll be stuck for choice when it comes to embarking on new public-private partnerships, and you'll have to sort of go with whoever is going to give you the bucks?
Not really. See, as I said, we've been kind of in operations for 4 months now. The appetite has been pretty good. You don't have to go in and give it to anybody who is coming, and that's exactly the role of a private-public partnership unit, because it has two major factors built in. One is value for money for the government, and the other is return for investment for the proponent. So we need to make sure we marry these things. So you're right. I mean, people think government tenders are easy bait, so you can jump in and take it, so anybody and everyone can come in. But here, these projects runs into decades. So you need to do a critical analysis to make sure that they are financially sustainable and that they have the ability to take the risks we transfer. So it's an all new ball game. I mean, probably my banking experience comes back into play now, having done project financing. So you begin to see purely on the financial viability and the ability to take the risks. What happens here is the government not only transfers the project, it also transfers certain risks over to the. So the pricing, you need to build in the risks.
My question to you though is this: there has been resistance from within the public, coming from the opposition as well, that Sri Lanka is being sold off piecemeal, that privatization has become a very ugly word. Do you or will the public-private partnership unit have sort of a communication strategy to win over the public?
See, we are in a political economy. Every action will be politicized, regardless. There's a distinct difference between a private-public partnership and a privatization process. The examples I give to people is a privatization is a divorce. You divorce your asset and let somebody else take over. PPP is a marriage, where you bring somebody in to create a new asset. So that's the distinct difference. But we need to understand is that take your family. I mean, this is the message we need to ask the public out there. Take your family. If your family income is X amount and 90% of that X amount goes to pay loans, how are you going to feed your family? So we are in a situation that we need to find resources. It's not about selling out. It is about getting someone else to take the burden of investment. Balance sheet is palatable. You can hold on to it. Otherwise, I mean, this kind of it's if you look at what happened in Greece, what happened in Spain, what happened in Portuguese, is all about your excess borrowing. You borrow more than what you can afford to pay. You're basically self-imposed bankruptcy.
You run the economy into the ground. Another concern that people are going to have with the new public-private partnership unit is that this is now the third body that will be dealing with foreign investment or private sector investment, in addition to the BOI and the Board of Investment and the Agency for Development. How is the public-private partnership unit different? Because the reason I ask this is one of the concerns that is raised is the lack of consistency in policy, ease of doing business needs to be more streamlined, etc. When you have so many different bodies working on it, doesn't it become too convoluted?
In a way, we will be complementing each other. But to draw a line, BOI is open for investment. It can be 100% commercial, whereas we are looking at investment for state initiatives. It can be infrastructure, roads, water, airports, ports. So these are essential infrastructure requirement for economic drive, whereas BOI could also have directly 100% commercially viable projects where investors come, do their business, take the money away. Here we are looking at more on a projects. So that way we differ. And even if you say the enterprise development unit comes in, I think in a way you have now broadened the scope, and you can now divide it and redirect to the right places so that it can move faster. Just imagine you had only one unit, and if they will probably get choked up with all the accelerated agenda, the reforms that we want to achieve. So it's not going to compete. I mean, this is an enabler. This unit will not own the projects. This unit will not take off any projects off the line ministries. All what we are trying to do is, because we got the training and the expertise from the World Bank, we have access to so many other PPP units across the world through the World Bank, so we can always benchmark, we can get references, we can get draft contracts, we can find out the risks that we are doing, we can find out the failure rate. PPP has not been successful, it has failed as well.
Okay, so before I let you go, Mr. Emerson, based on what you were saying just now, one last question. Many professionals that have worked with the government in the past in Sri Lanka have become disillusioned and have left. One of the primary complaints has been the political interference. We've had a change in minister since in the time frame that this has been set up. You've had a change in minister, you've got a new state minister in there. How is this going to impact your work? Are you worried about interference?
I'm not worried, because when I walked in, I came with my eyes open. I knew this. But of course, the change in the ministry was something that we didn't expect. But having said that, this unit, the appointment of myself, It's a cabinet decision. I'm sure there's a collective wisdom behind that decision, and this is a compulsion more than a requirement right now. So I suppose there shouldn't be any interferences. The only challenge we will have is that the buy-in and understanding of the role of the PPP along the line ministries, what it is.
Ms. Emerson, thank you very much for coming on Biz1st Review 360. It's been a pleasure having you with us. I wish you all the best, not to put too much pressure on you, but the fate of the economy may rest in your hands.
Well,
so,
thank you very much, and I'm sure the crowd we have and the support will be consistent, and we'll give it our best shot.
On the other side of this break, advice to the new finance minister. Welcome back to Biz1st Review 360. With heads rolling in key cabinet ministerial portfolios, we spoke to an economist and former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank for perspective on the composition of the new team put in place to get the economy back on track.
just over a year ago, when I first had the pleasure of meeting my guest this evening, he made an interesting comment. This was at the end of our program Face the Nation, which airs live on Monday nights. He said that the government of Sri Lanka is sitting on a volcano. Well, what's happened to that volcano? Are we still on top of that volcano? Have we gotten off? Is it heating up? Is it about to erupt? To talk about this and more, I'm joined by Dr. W.A. Wijewardena, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. Dr. Wijewardena, thank you very much for coming on Biz1st Review 360. So, are we off the volcano?
No, Nadeem. In fact, the situation has worsened today. If you look at the annual report of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka released about a month ago, all the important macroeconomic indicators the report has produced, they all actually tell us a story of an obituary notice. The economic growth has slowed down from about 4.8% in 2015 to 4.4% in 2016, and the per capita income in rupee terms has gone up, but because the Sri Lanka rupee had depreciated against the dollar, in dollar terms per capita income has declined. Then exports have declined. We have ended up with deficit in the balance of payments, and the country's external indebtedness has increased. On top of that, the government has borrowed a large sum of money from the central bank, which has led to the building up of the pressure on the inflation front. As a result, inflation has picked up from around 2% to 4%, and now it is around 8%. So when we look at all these indicators that had been published by the central bank, Nadeem, we can safely say our situation has become more critical today than 1 year ago.
So the pressure inside is building up inside this volcano.
It is in fact building up, yes.
Dr. Wijewardena, last week you gave a public lecture at the National Chamber of Commerce, and you had some very interesting advice for the new finance minister. What's your advice to him?
Well, the new finance minister has to work with foresight, and he has to work in close collaboration with the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. And instead of making certain remarks about the governor of the central bank in public, the new finance minister will have to respect the governor, because the governor, Nadeem, is the chief economic advisor of the government as well as the Minister of Finance. And also, the central bank has a talent pool, and all these talented officers will have to be utilized by the Ministry of Finance in order to get the things done in the Ministry of Finance. And for that purpose, the Minister of Finance will have to work with determination, with commitment, in order to carry on the necessary economic reform agenda which the government is planning to do.
Dr. Wijewardena, do you feel that the right choice is being made? Do you think that the new finance minister will be a good fit?
I think, Nadeem, he was better than his predecessor on many counts. In fact, Minister Karunanayake is also an able administrator, but finance was not the best place for him. He might do well in the Ministry of External Affairs, but in the case of Ministry of Finance, the things that he did right from the very beginning, for example, immediately 1 month after he was appointed, he was talking about some $3 billion US coming from some elusive Belgium investor, which didn't take place. And of course, when other people pointed out that that kind of money could be money laundered by the international money launderers, he was insisting that this Belgium money should come. And on top of that, then in the budget he submitted for year 2016, there were some numbers he had inflated with respect to education and healthcare services. Then various other measures that he had taken during the period that he was the Minister of Finance, all that had pointed out that he had not properly consulted the people whom he should have consulted. So given that particular scenario, I think the new Minister of Finance is the best choice which the government can have today.
This week we also saw a reshuffle of state and deputy ministers, and at least on social media, these two appointments have captured a lot of attention. The shift of Dr. Harsha De Silva from Foreign Affairs to National Policies and Economic Affairs, and the shift of Minister Iran Wickramaratne, who's now the State Minister for Finance. Now that you have State Minister Iran Wickramaratne also at the Ministry of Finance, how do you see this new configuration working out?
It's a good configuration, Nadeem, because Mr. Iran Wickramaratne has been a seasoned banker. Before he became a politician, he was the managing director of the National Development Bank, and before that he was at the Citibank. And because of that reason, he is the best person who could assist Minister Mangal Samaravira in introducing the reform program, and also in reforming the Ministry of Finance, as well as getting the support from the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. And with regard to Dr. Harsha De Silva, I can say that he had been doing a good job of work at the Ministry of External Affairs also. But coming back to the Ministry of Economic Affairs now as the Deputy Minister, he would be able to provide assistance to Prime Minister to introduce the economic reform program.
Do you think that he will have the ability to function independently?
Well, he has to acquire that ability. In fact, what I see, Nadeem, is that these three people in the top place, the Minister Mangal Samaravira and Minister Iran Wickramaratne, the Minister of Finance, then Prime Minister and Dr. Harsha De Silva in the Ministry of Economic Affairs, four of them will have to work together, and also they have to get the support from the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. Instead of treating Central Bank officers as enemies of the government, they will have to use their professional talents for the benefit of the country now.
Dr. Wijewardene, thank you very much again for coming on Biz1st Review 360. It's always a pleasure to have you with us.
Coming up after the break, what should Sri Lanka do with its loss-making state enterprises that are a strain on its fiscal position? Welcome back. This is Biz1st Review 360. Well, what to do with loss-making state enterprises that are a huge burden on the taxpayer? Dhananath Fernando from Advocata joins us for answers.
We're joined by the Chief Operating Officer of the Advocata Institute. It's a liberal policy think tank, Dhananath Fernando. Dhananath, thank you very much for being on the program.
Pleasure.
SOEs have been, or state-owned enterprises, have been a very uncomfortable thorn in the backs of successive governments. They tend to be quite large lumbering giants that are they're viewed as large lumbering giants that are fairly inefficient and put a huge strain on the budget as well. From the point of view of the Advocata Institute, what should we be doing with regard to Sri Lanka's state-owned enterprises right now?
Definitely, Nadeem, we have to go for a private-public partnership, or even we would advocate to move the priority ones to privatize. Because if you look at the state-owned enterprises, its footprint is large. And according to our last research, in 2009 there were around 102 to 107 state-owned enterprises, which has increased in 2015 to 245. And if you look at the employment, again, 1.2 million to 1.5 million are working in the state-owned enterprises sector. So which is a huge fiscal pressure for the government. So definitely we have to go for private-public partnerships and get private sector involved in these state-owned enterprises and make it more efficient and effective and productive for the service of the Sri Lankan community.
Thannath, when we're talking about policy matters, it's you advocate for various policies and you get it across to governments and you tell them, okay, this is what you need to be doing. There was an interesting report that was published by the International Crisis Group last month, or I think it was on the 16th of May, where they said that there are social realities in Sri Lanka that need to be taken into consideration, and that the government of Sri Lanka should work with bodies like the IMF or its creditors overseas basically to explore plans that can allow the government to conduct structural reforms while also mitigating these short-term sort of backlash that you'll be getting, social backlash that you'll be getting. Do you consider these short-term social backlashes in your policy advocacy?
Definitely, we will be considering those backlashes. That's why we said start off with a couple of state-owned enterprises which has been clearly loss-making. One would be Sri Lankan Airlines, obviously. And also government is involved in the retail sector, the Satosa, which is also a huge hole in the national accounts. And what we could do is at the initial stage, since we have like a 245 to 270 state-owned enterprises, the interesting thing is even the government doesn't know the exact number of state-owned enterprises under their purview. And also the other factor that when we try to do the research, there are also subsidiaries and like affiliated institutes for these state-owned enterprises, so which accounts are not publicly available. And so at this particular moment what we could do is ensure the accountability and the transparency of these state-owned enterprises. So still having it under the purview of the government, at least if you ensure the transparency, that would be the first step. Also places like Sri Lankan Airlines, as I said, Satosa, as I said, the hotel sector, leisure sector, those could be clearly can be go for a public-private partnership or even for the privatization, which is what we have considered, not to go for all the enterprises, but consider the prioritized one. Even in the society there is a norm now, it has built up the perception. Now a place like Sri Lankan Airlines, which lost like 6.5 billion, latest I think 2015 it lost like 32 billion, where our Samurdhi, the largest social network, allocation is 44 billion. And you lost Sri Lankan Airlines 32 billion per year, which make no sense. And Sri Lankan Airlines is not someone who is working in Hambantota, a labourer would not be a beneficiary of Sri Lankan Airlines having a national career. So those are the aspects that we have to think. So we have definitely considered that backlash option and the social norms in Sri Lanka, where privatization, the public-private partnerships, those are not like familiar terms in the Sri Lankan society. But we have to do this not for anything else, for the betterment of the citizen, because that pressure will come to the taxpayer's wallet.
Are public-private partnerships a viable option? Is it feasible for the country to seek public-private partnerships in the current climate?
In the current climate, still it's a yes. It could have been a no, because if we were thinking of like 1 year for an election, that could have been somewhat difficult. But I think still having 2.5 years for an election, it's still a possibility. And also we have seen, of course, there are certain cases which has failed. But what we see is in those occasions, the process has not been followed properly. If you look at Sri Lankan Telecom, if you remember many years ago, how long that you have to wait to get a telephone line, and how how bad was the situation, you can remember you have to wait for like one or 2 years in a queue to get a telephone line. But having changed that, getting the private sector involved and allowing opening the market where many players are now in, and telecommunication sector is one of the developed sectors, and you see like a lot of e-commerce sites are coming in, e-commerce businesses are emerging. So that all happened because of this one reform, where we went ahead, took the challenge, and similar case, there was a lot of pressure for the reform agenda at that time. But it really worked. What we could do is, at least the existing ones, if you can't really go for a reform, given the political situation, given the Sri Lankan context, at least ensure the transparency and the accountability. Because if you look at these accounts of these state-owned enterprises, they are normally delayed by 2 to 3 years. And interestingly, when we did the research, the amounts that they have reported, as an example, Sri Lankan Airlines, their loss in their annual report is differed from what they have reported to the COOP in Parliament. And there's another different figure which they have been reported to the Ministry of Finance, their Treasury report. And these are like couple of billions, not like 100 rupees, 200 rupees, even for millions, it's billions.
We have now a Board of Investment, an agency for development, and the Board of a public-private partnership unit. Do you think that this is all a little too convoluted and confusing?
What we would recommend is having the BOI for an investor, make it a one-stop shop. Now what happens is, if investor comes in, he has to go for like several places, and the communications between these institutes are very poor. So what we recommend is like not to have like a lot of institutions, have very few, because ultimately those institutions has also to be paid or like maintained by taxpayers' money, which also make the process very complicated, which is not convenient on the eyes of the investor. Dhananath
Fernando, thank you very much for being on Biz1st Review 360. It's been a pleasure having you with us.
Thank you very much.
That's all the news we have for you tonight. For the latest and trending, just look up us on Facebook, Biz1st Review 360. We'll see you again, same time, same place. Until then, take care. Good night.